The wedding dress weighed on Prudence Miller's shoulders like a yoke of iron, each stitch and seam a reminder that she was being sold to a stranger in the Colorado mountains. And as she stepped off the train in Silver Ridge on that sweltering August day in 1876, she felt her corset tighten around her rib cage until she could barely draw breath. The platform bustled with miners, merchants, and women in calico dresses, all moving with purpose through the mountain town that had sprung up seemingly overnight when silver was discovered in these peaks 3 years prior. Prudence stood frozen among her trunks, her hands trembling inside her white gloves. She had traveled alone from Philadelphia, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride, because staying in her aunt's house meant enduring another year of cruel comments about her size, another year of being called unlovable, another year of feeling like a burden no one wanted to carry. Métis. Miss Miller? A voice cut through the crowd, deep and gentle as distant thunder. Prudence turned and found herself staring at the broadest chest she had ever seen. Her gaze traveled upward, taking in a shirt stretched tight across muscles that spoke of years splitting logs and hauling stone, shoulders that could have carried a full-grown elk without strain, and a face weathered by wind and sun, but somehow kind. His dark hair fell past his collar, tied back loosely, and his eyes were the color of pine forests in shadow. He stood at least 6 inches past 6 feet, towering over her despite her own considerable height. "I am Jonas Blackwood," he said, removing his hat to reveal more of that dark hair. "I hope your journey was not too difficult." Prudence's tongue felt thick in her mouth. She had expected someone rough, perhaps cruel. The advertisement had been simple. Mountain man seeks wife for companionship and help with homestead. Must be strong and willing to work. She had written back honestly about her size, her plainness, expecting rejection. Instead, Jonas had responded with words that seemed too kind to be real, saying he valued strength and character over appearance, that mountain life required resilience more than beauty. "The journey was long," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm here now." Jonas nodded, his expression unreadable. He moved to collect her trunks, lifting them as though they weighed nothing more than feather pillows. Prudence watched the muscles in his forearms flex beneath his rolled sleeves, saw the easy power in his movements, and felt a cold fear settle in her stomach. Tonight, she would be his wife. Tonight, he would expect his marital rights. And Prudence, who had been told repeatedly by her aunt that no man would ever want her, who had been made to feel grotesque in her own skin, who had never been touched with anything resembling tenderness, felt terror crawl up her spine like frost on a window. "The preacher is waiting at the church," Jonas said, securing her trunks in a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. "Unless you need to rest first, we can wait until tomorrow if you are tired." The kindness in his offer nearly undid her. Prudence shook her head. "No, I would prefer to proceed as planned." Jonas helped her into the wagon, his hand steady under her elbow. Even that brief contact made her flinch, though she tried to hide it. If he noticed, he said nothing, simply climbed up beside her and took the reins. Silver Ridge spread before them in a chaotic sprawl of wooden buildings and dirt streets. The town had grown too fast for proper planning, and everything seemed thrown together in haste. Saloons stood next to dry goods stores. A hotel rose 3 stories above a blacksmith's forge. And everywhere Prudence looked, she saw men outnumbering women by what seemed like 10 to 1. "The church is just ahead," Jonas said, his voice cutting through her anxious thoughts. "It is not much to look at, but Pastor Williams is a good man. He will do right by us." Prudence gripped her hands together in her lap. "Mr. Blackwood, I must ask, your homestead is far from town." "About 8 miles up the mountain. It is isolated, but the land is good. I have a cabin, a barn, chickens, 2 cows, and a good stream for water." He glanced at her, and something in his expression softened. "I know this is not what you might have hoped for. I am not a wealthy man, but I work hard, and I will provide for you as best I can." "I did not expect wealth," Prudence said quietly. "I only hope for kindness." Jonas pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a small white church with a cross mounted above the door. He turned to face her fully, and his eyes held such earnest sincerity that Prudence felt her breath catch. "You will have that, Miss Miller. I give you my word." The ceremony was brief and simple. Pastor Williams, a thin man with wire spectacles and a gentle manner, led them through the vows with quiet efficiency. There were no guests, no flowers, no music, just Prudence in her traveling dress, Jonas in his clean shirt and worn trousers, and the dusty light filtering through the church windows. When Jonas slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band that fit perfectly, Prudence felt the weight of finality settle over her. She was married now, bound to this enormous man who could likely snap her in half without effort, who would expect her to share his bed, who would discover just how inadequate she truly was. "You may kiss your bride," Pastor Williams said with a smile. Jonas leaned down, moving slowly as though approaching a skittish horse. His lips brushed Prudence's cheek, nothing more, and then he straightened. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said softly. Prudence could not speak past the knot in her throat. They signed the register, Jonas's handwriting surprisingly neat and careful. He paid Pastor Williams, shook his hand, and then guided Prudence back to the wagon. The sun had begun its descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "We should get home before full dark," Jonas said as they started up the mountain road. "The trail can be treacherous if you do not know it well." Prudence nodded, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles showed white beneath her gloves. The wagon climbed steadily, leaving Silver Ridge behind and entering a world of towering pines and rocky outcroppings. The air grew cooler as they ascended, carrying the scent of sap and earth. "How long have you lived here?" Prudence asked, needing to break the silence that felt too heavy. 4 years, Jonas replied. "I came out from Missouri after the war, wanted someplace quiet, someplace where a man could build something with his own hands." He gestured to the forest around them. "I found it here." "The war," Prudence repeated softly. She had been only a child during those terrible years, but she remembered the lists of dead that filled the newspapers, the women who wore black for husbands and sons who never came home. "Which side did you fight for?" "The Union," Jonas said, his voice going distant. "I was at Antietam, Gettysburg, and the Wilderness, saw things no man should see." He was quiet for a moment, then seemed to shake himself. "But that is behind me now. I came here to leave all that death and suffering in the past." Prudence studied his profile, noting the faint scars on his hands, the way his jaw tightened when he spoke of the war. This man had seen violence, had likely dealt it out himself, and yet he had been nothing but gentle with her. The contradiction confused her, made her uncertain how to think of him. The trail narrowed as they climbed higher, the wagon wheels occasionally slipping on loose stones. Jonas handled the horses with easy competence, his voice low and soothing when they grew nervous at a particularly steep section. Prudence found herself watching his hands on the reins, noting the size and strength of them, and fear coiled tighter in her belly. "There," Jonas said, pointing ahead. "Home." The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by pines, backed up against a rocky slope. It was larger than Prudence had expected, built from thick logs chinked with clay, with a solid roof and a stone chimney. A covered porch ran along the front, and she could see a vegetable garden to one side, neat rows of plants thriving in the mountain soil. The barn stood a short distance away, sturdy and well-maintained. "It is lovely," Prudence said, and meant it. There was something honest about the place, something real that spoke of hard work and careful planning. Jonas brought the wagon to a stop near the porch and climbed down. He reached up to help Prudence, his hands spanning her waist easily as he lifted her to the ground. She flinched again at the contact, and this time she saw him notice. His brow furrowed slightly, but he said nothing, only released her and stepped back. "Let me show you inside," he said. "We can bring your trunks in after." The cabin's interior was simple but clean. The main room held a large stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the hearth, and shelves lined with books and supplies. A doorway led to what appeared to be a bedroom, and another to a small storeroom. The floors were wood plank, swept clean, and curtains hung at the windows. "I know it is not fancy," Jonas said, watching her take it all in, "but it is solid and warm. I built it to last." "It is more than I expected," Prudence admitted. She moved to the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines. Shakespeare, Thoreau, Whitman, and a dozen others she recognized. "You read?" "My mother was a school teacher," Jonas explained. "She made sure I learned my letters and developed a love for books. Out here, they are good company on long winter nights. Prudence felt something shift inside her chest, some small crack in the wall of fear she had built. A man who read poetry seemed less frightening somehow, more human. "I will bring in your things," Jonas said. "There is fresh water in the bucket if you want to wash. The bedroom is through there." He hesitated, then added, "Take your time settling in. I will prepare supper." He left before Prudence could respond, and she heard him moving around outside, unloading her trunks. She stood alone in her new home, feeling the silence press against her ears. Slowly, she moved to the bedroom doorway and looked inside. The room was dominated by a large bed, covered with a quilt in shades of blue and green. A dresser stood against one wall, a washstand against another, and a trunk at the foot of the bed. The window looked out onto the forest, and the late afternoon light made everything glow softly. Prudence's breath came faster. Tonight, she would share that bed with Jonas. Tonight, he would claim his rights as a husband. And she, who had never known a man's touch, who had been told her entire life that she was too large, too plain, too undesirable, would have to submit to whatever he wanted. The thought made her stomach turn. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting back the nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. "Mrs. Blackwood?" Jonas's voice came from the main room. "I have brought your trunks inside. Would you like help unpacking?" "No," Prudence called back, her voice too sharp. She forced herself to soften it. "No, thank you. I can manage." She heard him move away, heard the clatter of pots and pans as he began preparing their meal. Prudence sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling in her lap. She had made her choice when she answered that advertisement. She had nowhere else to go, no other options. Whatever came tonight, she would have to endure it. But oh, how she wished she could simply disappear. Prudence forced herself to stand, to unpack at least enough to make it seem like she was settling in. She hung a few dresses in the wardrobe, placed her brush and comb on the dresser, and tucked her most precious possession, a small locket with her mother's portrait, into the top drawer. Her mother had died when Prudence was 12, leaving her to the mercy of her father's cold sister, a woman who had made it clear every day that Prudence was a burden and a disappointment. The smell of cooking meat and vegetables drew Prudence back to the main room eventually. Jonas stood at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. He had removed his vest and rolled his sleeves higher, revealing more of those powerful forearms. Prudence found herself staring at the play of muscle beneath his skin, the easy strength with which he moved. "I hope you like venison stew," Jonas said without turning. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage the basics." "I'm sure it will be fine," Prudence said. She moved to the table, uncertain what to do with her hands. "Is there something I can help with?" "You can set the table if you like. Dishes are in that cabinet there." Prudence found simple pottery plates and cups, along with sturdy utensils. She set 2 places at the table, moving carefully in the unfamiliar space. Jonas watched her from the corner of his eye. She could feel it, but he said nothing. When the stew was ready, Jonas ladled generous portions into their bowls and brought over a loaf of bread he had apparently baked earlier. They sat across from each other, the table suddenly feeling very small. "We should say grace," Jonas said. He held out his hand across the table. Prudence stared at it for a moment, that large, calloused hand extended toward her. Slowly, she placed her own hand in his. His palm was warm and rough from work, his fingers engulfing hers completely. He bowed his head. "May Lord, we thank you for this food, for this home, and for bringing Prudence safely to me. Help me to be worthy of the trust she has placed in me, and guide us both as we begin this new life together." "Amen." "Amen," Prudence whispered. Jonas released her hand and picked up his spoon. Prudence did the same, tasting the stew. It was simple, but good, the meat tender and the vegetables cooked perfectly. "This is very good," she said, surprised. Jonas smiled, the expression transforming his face. "I've had years of practice. A man living alone learns to cook or goes hungry." They ate in silence for a while, but it felt less oppressive now. Prudence found herself sneaking glances at Jonas, trying to reconcile his size and obvious strength with the gentleness she had seen so far. He ate with careful manners, wiping his mouth with a napkin, taking small bites despite the fact that he could probably have eaten twice what was on his plate. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Jonas said eventually. What was your life like there? Prudence set down her spoon, choosing her words carefully. I lived with my aunt after my mother died. My father passed when I was very young, so I barely remember him. My aunt ran a boarding house and I helped her manage it. Did you enjoy the work? No, Prudence said honestly. My aunt was not a kind woman. She made it clear that I was there out of obligation, not love. When I saw your advertisement, I thought... She trailed off, unsure how to finish. You thought it could not be worse than what you had, Jonas finished softly. Prudence met his eyes, surprised by his understanding. Yes, Jonas nodded slowly. I know something of difficult family. My father was a hard man, quick with his fists and slow with his praise. I left home as soon as I was old enough to work on my own. He paused, his expression thoughtful. I want you to know, Prudence, that I will never raise a hand to you in anger. I have seen too much violence in my life. I will not bring it into my home. The sincerity in his voice made Prudence's throat tighten. Thank you, she managed. They finished their meal, and Prudence insisted on washing the dishes despite Jonas's protests. It gave her something to do with her hands, some way to delay the inevitable. She could feel the evening creeping closer, could sense the moment approaching when Jonas would expect to claim his marital rights. When the dishes were clean and put away, Jonas built up the fire in the hearth. Full darkness had fallen outside, and the forest sounds filtered through the walls. An owl hooted somewhere close by, and Prudence heard the distant howl of what might have been a wolf. Do wolves come near the cabin? She asked, her voice tight. Sometimes, Jonas said, but they generally leave us alone. The chickens are locked up tight in the coop and the cows are safe in the barn. Nothing to worry about. He moved to the bedroom, and Prudence heard him lighting a lamp. Her heart began to pound so hard she felt dizzy. This was it, the moment she had been dreading all day. Jonas emerged from the bedroom carrying a bundle of blankets and a pillow. Prudence stared at him in confusion as he arranged them on the floor near the hearth. What are you doing? She asked. Jonas looked up at her, his expression gentle. Making my bed. You take the bedroom. I will sleep out here. Prudence blinked. I do not understand. We are married. You have the right to. I have the right to nothing you do not freely give, Jonas said firmly. He straightened, the blankets arranged to his satisfaction. Prudence, I can see that you are afraid. You have flinched every time I have come near you today. I will not force myself on a woman who fears me. But the marriage, Prudence whispered, it is not valid unless... The marriage is valid because we spoke our vows before God and witnesses, Jonas interrupted. What happens between us beyond that is our own business. No one else needs to know. He moved closer, but stopped several feet away, keeping distance between them. I asked you to come here because I wanted a partner, a companion, someone to share this life with. I did not bring you here to be afraid every night. Tears sprang to Prudence's eyes, shocking her. She had not cried in years, had learned to lock away her emotions where her aunt could not use them against her. But Jonas's kindness, so unexpected and undeserved, cracked something open inside her. I do not understand why you are being so kind, she said, her voice breaking. I am not what men want. I am too large, too plain. My aunt told me repeatedly that I should be grateful for any man who would have me, that I would have to accept whatever treatment I received because no one else would want me. Jonas's jaw tightened, anger flashing across his face, though Prudence sensed it was not directed at her. Your aunt was wrong, and cruel to tell you such things. He took a slow breath, his voice softening. Prudence, look at me. She raised her eyes to his, tears blurring her vision. You are my wife, Jonas said. That means I'm supposed to cherish you, to care for you, to make sure you feel safe and valued, not to use you for my own satisfaction while you lie there terrified. He shook his head. I know I am large and probably frightening to look at. I know my size alone could hurt you if I was not careful. That is exactly why I will not touch you until you want me to. And if that never happens? Prudence asked, her voice barely audible. Jonas was quiet for a long moment. Then it never happens. I will keep my word to provide for you and protect you. That's enough. Prudence stared at this man who seemed too good to be real. I do not deserve your kindness. Everyone deserves kindness, Jonas said simply. Now, you should get some rest. Tomorrow I will show you around the homestead, and you can decide how you want to spend your days here. The work is yours to choose, not mine to command. He settled onto his makeshift bed, arranging the blankets around himself. His feet stuck out past the end, too tall even for the generous amount of space he had given himself. Prudence stood frozen, uncertain what to do. Go on, Jonas said gently. The bed is comfortable. I made sure of that when I built it. Prudence moved to the bedroom on shaking legs. She changed into her nightgown behind the privacy screen Jonas had thoughtfully placed in the corner, then climbed into the large bed. The quilt smelled of pine and clean air, and the mattress was indeed comfortable, stuffed with what felt like fresh straw and feathers. She lay in the darkness, listening to Jonas settling in the main room. She heard the fire crackle, heard his breathing slow and deepen as he fell asleep. And Prudence, who had expected this night to be one of pain and humiliation, found herself weeping quietly into her pillow, overwhelmed by the simple gift of being treated with human dignity. Prudence woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying. For a moment she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then memory returned, the events of yesterday washing over her in a wave. She was married. She lived in a cabin on a Colorado mountain, and her husband had slept on the floor rather than force himself on her. She dressed quickly in a simple work dress and apron, braiding her hair and pinning it up. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Jonas already dressed, standing at the stove with his back to her. "Good morning," he said without turning. "I hope you slept well." "I did," Prudence said, surprised to find it was true. Despite her emotional turmoil, exhaustion had claimed her, and she had slept deeply. "Thank you." Jonas turned, a plate in his hand. "Breakfast is ready. Nothing fancy, just bacon, eggs, and biscuits." They ate together at the table, and Prudence noticed that Jonas seemed careful to keep his movements slow and predictable, never reaching across her space, always maintaining a respectful distance. It was as though he was working very hard to seem less intimidating, and she appreciated the effort, even as it made her heart ache. After breakfast, Jonas showed her around the homestead. The chickens needed feeding and their eggs collecting. The cows, a placid brown pair named Bessie and Maple, needed milking. The garden required weeding and watering from the stream that ran clear and cold through the property. There was butter to churn, bread to bake, clothes to wash and mend. "I have been managing it all myself," Jonas explained as they walked through the garden, "but it takes most of my day just to keep up with the basics. I have not been able to expand the way I wanted to. My hope was that with two of us working together, we could build something larger. Maybe add more chickens, plant more vegetables, perhaps get some pigs or sheep." "I can help with all of that," Prudence said. She had worked hard in her aunt's boarding house, knew how to cook and clean and manage supplies. "I'm not afraid of work." Jonas smiled at her, and Prudence felt something flutter in her chest. "I did not think you were. You came all this way alone, answered an advertisement from a complete stranger. That takes courage." "Or desperation," Prudence said quietly. "Maybe both," Jonas acknowledged. "But you are here now, and this is your home as much as mine. You should feel free to change things, to arrange the cabin however you like. I want you to be comfortable." Over the following days, Prudence settled into a routine. She woke early and prepared breakfast while Jonas saw to the animals. They worked together in companionable silence, learning each other's rhythms. Jonas was patient when she did not know how to do something, showing her the best way to milk the cows or collect eggs without startling the hens. Prudence found herself relaxing incrementally, her shoulders loosening from their perpetual hunch, her hands steadying. Every night, Jonas made his bed by the fire. Every night, Prudence slept alone in the large bedroom. And slowly, the fear that had gripped her so tightly began to ease. A week after their wedding, Prudence was kneading bread dough at the kitchen table when Jonas came in from chopping wood. His shirt clung to his chest with sweat despite the cool mountain air, and Prudence found her eyes drawn to the play of muscles across his shoulders. She looked away quickly, embarrassed by her own curiosity. "I need to go into town tomorrow," Jonas said, washing his hands in the basin. "We need some supplies I cannot make or grow here. Would you like to come with me, or would you prefer to stay here?" Prudence considered. She had not left the homestead since arriving, and part of her was curious to see Silver Ridge again. But another part, enjoyed the isolation, the peace of being away from judging eyes. "I will come," she decided. "I would like to see the town properly." Jonas nodded. "We will leave early then. It's a long ride down and back up." The next morning, they set out in the wagon, as the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky pink. Prudence had dressed in her better dress, though she felt self-conscious about the way it pulled tight across her bosom and hips. Jonas helped her into the wagon, his hand steady under her elbow, and she found she did not flinch this time. The ride down the mountain was beautiful. Morning light filtered through the pines, and Prudence saw deer grazing in a meadow, their heads lifting to watch the wagon pass. Jonas pointed out landmarks, telling her the names he had given to various rock formations and clearings. "That one there, I call Eagle's Rest," he said, indicating a flat-topped boulder. "I have seen a golden eagle perch there more than once." "Do you ever feel lonely out here?" Prudence asked. Jonas was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Especially in the winter when the snow is too deep to get to town for weeks at a time. That is part of why I wanted a wife. Not just for the work, but for the company. For someone to talk to when the silence gets too heavy." "I understand that," Prudence said softly. "I was lonely in Philadelphia too, even surrounded by people." "The worst kind of lonely," Jonas agreed. "Being alone in a crowd is harder than being alone in the wilderness." They reached Silver Ridge as the town was coming to life. Miners headed toward the shafts that honeycombed the mountains, shopkeepers opened their doors, and women emerged to shake rugs and sweep porches. Jonas guided the wagon to the general store and helped Prudence down. Inside, the store was crowded with goods: barrels of flour and sugar, bolts of fabric, tools and medicines, and 1,000 other necessities lined the shelves and filled the floor space. A thin man with mutton chop whiskers stood behind the counter. "Jonas," he said with a smile. "Good to see you. And this must be your bride. Welcome to Silver Ridge, Mrs. Blackwood." "Thank you," Prudence said quietly. Jonas began selecting items from his list, discussing quantities with the shopkeeper. Prudence wandered through the store, running her fingers over soft fabric, examining jars of preserves and packages of tea. She paused at a display of hair ribbons, pretty things in various colors that made her think of the life she might have had if she had been born beautiful. "Do you like those?" Jonas asked, appearing at her elbow. Prudence snatched her hand back. "They are frivolous." "Maybe," Jonas said. He picked up a ribbon in deep green, the color of pine needles. "But everyone deserves something frivolous now and then." He handed it to the shopkeeper. "We will take this too." "Jonas, you do not need to," Prudence protested. "I want to," he said simply. While the shopkeeper tallied their purchases, Jonas excused himself to visit the blacksmith. Prudence waited near the counter, uncomfortable under the appraising stare of two women who had entered the store. "So you are the mail-order bride," one of them said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Must have been desperate to come all this way for a mountain hermit." "Better than being alone, I suppose," the other one said with a snide smile, "though I cannot imagine what Jonas Blackwood was thinking. He could have had his pick of girls in town." Prudence felt heat flood her face. She kept her eyes down, her hands clenched in her skirt. "Then again," the first woman continued, "maybe he wanted someone who would not have other options, someone who could not leave even if she wanted to." "That's enough," a new voice said sharply. Prudence looked up to see an older woman with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense expression glaring at the two gossips. "You two should be ashamed of yourselves, speaking that way about someone you do not even know. Get out of my husband's store if you cannot behave with common decency." The two women left in a huff, and the older woman turned to Prudence with a kind smile. "I apologize for them. Small towns breed small minds sometimes. I am Martha Henderson. My husband owns this store." "Prudence Blackwood," Prudence managed, her voice shaking. "It is a pleasure to meet you properly," Martha said. "Jonas is a good man, one of the best. You are lucky to have found each other." She patted Prudence's hand. "Do not listen to those harpies. They are just jealous because Jonas never gave either of them the time of day." Jonas returned a few minutes later, carrying a new axe head and some nails. If he noticed that Prudence seemed upset, he said nothing, simply paid for their purchases and helped load them into the wagon. They made one more stop at the post office, where Jonas mailed a letter and checked for any correspondence. Then, they began the long climb back up the mountain. They were about halfway home when Jonas spoke. "You are very quiet. Did something happen while I was at the blacksmith?" Prudence hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Some women in the store said unkind things. Mrs. Henderson chased them off." Jonas's hands tightened on the reins. "What kind of unkind things?" "It does not matter." "It matters to me." Prudence took a breath. "They implied that you must have been desperate to marry someone like me, that I was lucky you would have me at all." Jonas pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. His expression was thunderous. "Who were they?" "It does not matter," Prudence repeated. "I am used to such comments." "Well, you should not have to be." Jonas's voice was tight with controlled anger. "And for the record, they have it backward. I am the lucky one. You took a tremendous risk coming here. You could have arrived to find me cruel or dishonest. Instead, you trusted me, and you have worked hard every day to build a life here. That takes strength and courage." Prudence felt tears prick her eyes again. "You do not have to say such things." "I'm not saying them to be kind," Jonas said. "I'm saying them because they are true." He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently touched her hand where it rested in her lap. "Prudence, I know we have only known each other a short time, but I want you to know that I am glad you are here. Truly glad." His hand was warm over hers, his touch gentle despite the calluses. Prudence looked down at their joined hands, hers so pale and soft compared to his weathered strength. Something shifted inside her chest, some small crack in the armor she had built around her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. Jonas squeezed her hand once, then released it and took up the reins again. They continued home in silence, but it felt different now. Less like the silence of strangers, and more like the comfortable quiet of people who were beginning to understand each other. That night, after supper, Prudence sat in the rocking chair near the fire with some mending. Jonas settled at the table with a book, the lamplight casting shadows across his features. Prudence found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, studying the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair fell forward when he bent over the pages, the size of his hands as he turned each leaf. He was handsome, she realized. Not in the refined way of the men she had occasionally seen in Philadelphia society, but in a raw, rugged way that seemed suited to these mountains. And he was kind. That was what truly mattered. He had been nothing but patient and gentle with her, had given her space to adjust without pressure or demands. "Jonas," she said suddenly, surprising herself. He looked up from his book. "Yes? Why did you really want a wife? The truth, please." Jonas set down his book and leaned back in his chair. "The truth is that I was lonely. But more than that, I wanted to build something lasting. I have this land, this cabin, but without someone to share it with, it feels hollow. I wanted a family someday, children to carry on after I'm gone, a wife to grow old beside." He met her eyes. "I wanted a partner in the fullest sense, someone who would work beside me, yes, but also someone I could talk to, laugh with, depend on, someone who would depend on me in return." "And you thought a mail-order bride would give you that?" Prudence asked. "I thought it was the best option I had," Jonas said honestly. "Women in Silver Ridge have their pick of men. Most of them want someone who will take them away from the frontier, not deeper into it. I needed someone who understood that this life is hard but rewarding. Someone strong enough to handle it." "You could have described yourself more favorably in your advertisement," Prudence pointed out. "You could have made yourself sound more prosperous, more established." "I could have," Jonas agreed. "But then I would have gotten someone who expected something I could not provide. I wanted honesty from the start. That is why I appreciated your letter so much. You were honest about yourself, too. No false promises or exaggerations." Prudence looked down at her mending. "I told you about my size because I did not want you to feel deceived when I arrived. I expected you to change your mind." "Why would your size matter to me?" Jonas asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Because it matters to everyone else," Prudence said quietly. "My aunt made sure I understood that I was too large to be desirable, that I should be grateful for scraps of affection, because no man would truly want me." Jonas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He crossed to her, then dropped to one knee so they were at eye level. Prudence's breath caught at the sudden proximity. "Listen to me, Prudence," he said, his voice intense. "Your aunt was a fool, and a cruel one at that. There is nothing wrong with your size. You are strong and healthy, and that is what matters here. Do you know what I thought when I first saw you at the train station?" Prudence shook her head, unable to speak. "I thought you were beautiful," Jonas said simply. "I thought you had kind eyes and a pretty face, and I felt relieved that you were tall because it meant I would not have to bend in half every time I wanted to talk to you properly." His lips quirked in a slight smile. "I also thought you looked terrified, and I wondered what I could do to make you feel safe." "You think I am beautiful?" Prudence whispered, disbelief thick in her voice. "I do," Jonas said firmly. "But more than that, I think you are brave and capable and good. I would be proud to have you as my partner in truth, not just on paper, but only when you are ready. Only when you want that too." He stood and returned to his chair, picking up his book as though he had not just turned Prudence's world upside down. She sat frozen, her mending forgotten in her lap, trying to process what he had said. Beautiful. He had called her beautiful, and the way he had looked at her when he said it, the honesty in his eyes, made her think he actually meant it. Prudence retired to the bedroom shortly after, but sleep eluded her. She lay in the darkness, thinking about Jonas kneeling before her, his eyes so sincere, thinking about the way he had touched her hand in the wagon, gentle and careful, thinking about how safe she felt in this cabin with this man who could break her in half, but chose instead to protect her. Something was changing inside her. The fear was still there, but it was fading, replaced by something else. Something that made her heart beat faster when Jonas smiled at her. Something that made her want to reach out and touch him, to close the distance he so carefully maintained. But years of cruel words and harsh treatment had taught Prudence not to trust her own desires. So she pushed the feelings down and tried to sleep. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and subtle shifts. Prudence found herself growing more comfortable around Jonas, no longer flinching when he moved near her. She learned to read his moods, to tell when he was tired or troubled. She watched him work, splitting logs with powerful swings of his axe, and felt her mouth go dry at the display of strength. Jonas, for his part, continued to maintain his respectful distance, but Prudence caught him watching her sometimes, his eyes following her movements around the cabin with an expression she could not quite decipher. He found small ways to make her smile, leaving wildflowers on the table, or doing her least favorite chores without being asked. One afternoon, Prudence was hanging laundry when she heard Jonas call her name urgently. She hurried around the cabin to find him standing very still near the woodpile, his eyes on something in the shadows. "Do not move quickly," he said quietly. "There is a mountain lion behind the barn." Prudence's heart leaped into her throat. She had heard the big cat screaming in the night sometimes, an eerie sound that made her skin crawl. She had never seen one. "Walk slowly toward me," Jonas instructed. "Do not run." Prudence forced herself to move carefully, her eyes searching the shadows. She caught a glimpse of tawny fur, amber eyes watching them with predatory focus. Terror locked her joints, made her feet feel like lead. "That is it," Jonas murmured. "Just a few more steps." Prudence reached him, and his arm came around her, pulling her behind his body. He was a wall of muscle between her and the cat, solid and unmovable. He raised his other arm, making himself look larger, and shouted at the mountain lion. The cat hesitated, then melted back into the forest, disappearing like smoke. Jonas did not release Prudence immediately. His arms stayed around her, his body tense and ready. Only when he was certain the danger had passed did he turn to look down at her. "Are you all right?" he asked. Prudence realized she was shaking, her hands clutching the front of Jonas's shirt. She was pressed against his chest, could feel the steady thump of his heart, could smell the scent of pine and earth that always clung to him. And for the first time, being close to him did not frighten her. Instead, she felt safe. "I'm all right," she managed. "Thank you." Jonas's arm was still around her waist, his hand spread across her back. Prudence could feel the heat of his palm through her dress, could feel the careful control he exercised to keep from holding her too tightly. She looked up at him and found his eyes on her face, dark and intense. "Prudence," he said, his voice rough. She did not know who moved first. Perhaps they both did. But suddenly, Jonas's lips were on hers, gentle and warm, asking rather than demanding. Prudence made a small sound of surprise, then found herself kissing him back, her hands sliding up to his shoulders. The kiss was brief, tender, nothing like the brutal claiming she had feared. When Jonas pulled back, his eyes searched her face anxiously. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should not have done that without asking." "I'm not sorry," Prudence whispered, surprising herself. Something blazed in Jonas's eyes, but he stepped back carefully, putting space between them. "The mountain lion could come back. We should stay close to the cabin for the rest of the day." They went inside, and Jonas made sure all the doors and windows were secure. Prudence moved through her afternoon tasks in a daze, her fingers touching her lips repeatedly, remembering the feel of Jonas's mouth on hers. She had been kissed, and it had not been awful. It had been wonderful. That night, Prudence stood in the bedroom doorway, watching Jonas arrange his blankets by the fire. She thought about that kiss, about the way his arms had felt around her, about the safety she had felt pressed against his chest. She thought about the weeks of kindness he had shown her, the patience, the respect. And she made a decision. "Jonas," she said softly. He looked up from his blankets. "Yes? You do not have to sleep out here anymore, if you want. If you would like, you could sleep in the bed." The words tumbled out in a rush, and Prudence felt her face flame. "I mean, you do not have to, but I would not mind. That is, I think I would like it if you did." Jonas stood slowly, his expression cautious. "Prudence, I do not want you to feel obligated." "I do not," Prudence said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I am still afraid. I cannot lie about that. But I trust you, and I am tired of letting fear rule my life." Jonas crossed to her, stopping a few feet away. "I need you to understand what you are saying. If I come into that bedroom with you, I will want to touch you. Not tonight, maybe not for many nights, but eventually I will want all that marriage entails. I am trying very hard to be patient and honorable, but I am still a man, and you are my wife." "I know," Prudence said, her hands twisted in her nightgown. "I'm not ready for everything yet, but perhaps we could start small. Perhaps you could just hold me." "Just hold you," Jonas repeated, his voice strained. "Yes, like you did this afternoon when you protected me from the mountain lion. That felt good. I felt safe." Prudence took a shaking breath. "My aunt told me that intimacy between a man and woman was something to be endured, something painful and degrading that women suffered for the sake of having children. But you make me think she might have been wrong about that too." Jonas closed his eyes briefly, his jaw clenched. When he opened them again, his expression was fierce. "Your aunt was wrong about everything. Intimacy between a husband and wife should be beautiful, something shared with joy, not fear. And I swear to you, Prudence, that I will do everything in my power to show you that. But only at your pace, only when you are ready." He held out his hand, and after only a moment's hesitation, Prudence took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. Together, they walked into the bedroom. Jonas extinguished the lamp, leaving only the moonlight filtering through the window. They climbed into the bed from opposite sides, the mattress dipping under Jonas's considerable weight. For a moment, they lay on their backs, separated by a foot of space, both staring at the ceiling. "Can I put my arm around you?" Jonas asked quietly. "Yes," Prudence whispered. Jonas rolled onto his side and carefully slid his arm under her shoulders, drawing her against his chest. His other arm came around her waist, and Prudence found herself enveloped in warmth and strength. She tensed initially, old fears rising, but Jonas did nothing more than hold her. His breath stirred her hair, and she could feel his heartbeat against her back. "Is this all right?" he asked. "Yes," Prudence said, and realized she meant it. The initial tension began to drain from her muscles. She let herself relax into his embrace, let herself feel the comfort of being held. "This is nice." Jonas pressed his lips to the top of her head, a gentle kiss. "Sleep well, Prudence. Sleep well, Jonas." Prudence fell asleep wrapped in her husband's arms, feeling safer than she had in years. From that night forward, Jonas slept in the bed. They developed a pattern, coming together each night with Jonas holding Prudence as they drifted off to sleep. Sometimes they talked in the darkness, sharing stories about their pasts, their hopes for the future. Sometimes they simply lay together in comfortable silence. Gradually, Prudence grew bolder. She began touching Jonas during the day, small gestures like brushing his shoulder in passing or taking his hand when they walked. Each touch was a victory over her fear, a declaration that she was learning to trust him. Jonas responded to her tentative overtures with careful enthusiasm. He would catch her hand and bring it to his lips, kissing her knuckles. He would tuck a strand of hair behind her ear when they sat together in the evening. He would rest his hand on the small of her back when she stood at the stove, a silent presence offering support. September arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color. Jonas began cutting firewood in earnest, stacking it against the cabin to dry for the winter. Prudence helped where she could, gathering kindling and stacking smaller pieces. One afternoon, she paused in her work to watch Jonas swing his axe. His shirt was off despite the cool air, and sweat gleamed on his skin. Prudence found herself staring at the play of muscles across his back and shoulders, at the way his body moved with such controlled power. Heat that had nothing to do with exertion flooded through her. Jonas turned and caught her staring. He smiled, slow and knowing. "See something you like?" Prudence felt her face flame, but she did not look away. "Maybe." Jonas set down his axe and crossed to where she stood. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could count the faint scars that marked his jaw. "Prudence," he said, his voice low and rough. "Yes," she breathed. "I want to kiss you again. May I?" Instead of answering with words, Prudence rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. Jonas made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, one hand cupping the back of her head while the other spanned her waist. The kiss was deeper than their first, more urgent, and Prudence felt something ignite inside her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jonas rested his forehead against hers. "You are going to be the death of me, woman." "Is that a bad thing?" Prudence asked, surprised by her own boldness. Jonas laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Not even a little bit." That night, as they lay in bed, Jonas's hands began to wander. Nothing improper, just gentle touches along her arm, her shoulder, her side. Prudence found herself arching into the caresses, wanting more without quite knowing what more entailed. "Tell me if I do anything you do not like," Jonas murmured against her ear. "Tell me, and I will stop immediately." "I will," Prudence promised. Jonas's hand slid up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You are so beautiful," he said. "I wish I could make you see yourself the way I see you." "How do you see me?" Prudence asked. "Strong, brave, kind, beautiful inside and out." Jonas's lips found hers in the darkness, kissing her slowly, thoroughly. "Perfect, just as you are." Prudence felt tears slip down her temples. "No one has ever said such things to me." "Then everyone else was blind," Jonas said fiercely. He kissed away her tears, his touch unbearably gentle. "I will spend the rest of my life showing you your own worth, if you will let me." "I want that," Prudence whispered. "I want you." "Are you certain?" Jonas asked, his body tense with restraint. Prudence took his hand and placed it over her heart, where it pounded against her ribs. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "but I trust you. I know you will not hurt me." "Never," Jonas vowed. "I will be so gentle with you, Prudence, I promise." What followed was a slow, sweet initiation into intimacy. Jonas kept his word, moving carefully, checking with Prudence at every step. There was some discomfort initially, but Jonas's patience and care made it bearable. And when that first moment of pain passed, Prudence discovered sensations she had never imagined, pleasure that built and spiraled until she cried out against Jonas's shoulder. Afterward, Jonas held her close, pressing kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I am wonderful," Prudence said, surprised to find it was true. There was tenderness between her thighs, but it was nothing compared to the joy flooding through her. "That was nothing like my aunt described," Jonas laughed softly. "I should hope not." He pulled the quilt over them both, tucking it around her shoulders. "Thank you for trusting me." "Thank you for being worthy of trust," Prudence replied. They fell asleep tangled together, and when Prudence woke in the morning, she found Jonas watching her with such tenderness in his eyes that her breath caught. "Good morning, wife," he said softly. "Good morning, husband," Prudence replied, and leaned in to kiss him. As autumn deepened into winter, Prudence and Jonas's marriage deepened into something rich and true. They worked side by side during the day, and at night they explored each other with growing confidence and joy. Prudence discovered that her body, which she'd been taught to see as shameful, was capable of giving and receiving pleasure. Jonas showed her that intimacy could be playful as well as passionate, tender as well as fierce. The first snow arrived in late October, transforming the mountain into a wonderland of white. Jonas had been right about the isolation. Once the snow grew deep, leaving the homestead became difficult. But Prudence did not mind. She had everything she needed right here. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking. Jonas taught Prudence to play checkers, and she taught him a card game her mother had shown her as a child. They laughed together, argued good-naturedly over trivial things, and made love with increasing passion. One night in December, as snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled on the hearth, Prudence realized she had fallen in love with her husband. It was not a sudden revelation, but rather a gradual awareness of something that had been growing for weeks. She loved the way Jonas hummed while he worked, loved his quiet strength and his gentle humor. She loved the way he looked at her like she was precious, the way he held her at night as though she might slip away if he let go. "Jonas," she said, interrupting his reading. He looked up from his book, firelight casting shadows across his features. "Yes?" "I love you," Prudence said simply. Jonas's expression transformed, wonder and joy chasing across his face. He set down his book and crossed to where she sat in the rocking chair. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his much larger ones. "I love you too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment you stepped off that train, looking so brave and so scared at the same time, and I have fallen deeper every day since." Prudence cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rasp of his evening beard against her palms. "I was so afraid when I came here. I thought marriage would be a prison, but you made it a sanctuary." Jonas turned his head to kiss her palm. "You saved me too, you know. I was dying of loneliness up here. You brought life back to this place, brought light and warmth and laughter. You made this house a home." They came together in a kiss that held all the love and passion they felt, and later, in their bed, they loved each other with a tenderness that brought tears to Prudence's eyes. Winter passed in a blur of quiet contentment. They talked about expanding the homestead come spring, about adding more animals and planting a larger garden. Jonas spoke of building an addition onto the cabin, creating more space for the future they were building together. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the earth, Prudence had news for Jonas. She waited until they were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Jonas," she said, reaching for his hand, "I have something to tell you." He laced his fingers through hers. "What is it?" "I'm with child," Prudence said, watching his face carefully. "The baby should come in early autumn." Jonas went very still. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, brighter than the setting sun. "Truly?" "Truly," Prudence confirmed. Jonas let out a whoop of joy that probably echoed all the way down to Silver Ridge. He swept Prudence up into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. When he set her down, his eyes were wet with tears. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Prudence asked, though the answer was obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Jonas said. He knelt and pressed his ear to her belly, even though there was nothing to hear yet. "Hello, little one. This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Prudence ran her fingers through Jonas's hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This man, who had shown her such patience and kindness, who had taught her that she was worthy of love, was going to be the father of her child. She could not imagine anything more perfect. The pregnancy was not always easy. Prudence suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and as summer arrived and she grew larger, the heat made her uncomfortable. But Jonas was attentive and caring, doing extra chores without complaint, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings and making sure she rested. He also became even more protective. When they went to town for supplies, his arms stayed firmly around her, and his eyes promised retribution to anyone who looked at her wrong. The two women who had been cruel to Prudence on her first visit gave them a wide berth, which suited Prudence just fine. Martha Henderson, on the other hand, became a valued friend. She offered advice about pregnancy and childbirth, and she knitted tiny clothes for the baby with skilled hands. She also shared stories about her own children, now grown and scattered, that made Prudence laugh and sometimes cry. As Prudence's belly swelled with their child, Jonas seemed to fall even more deeply in love with her. He would rest his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby move, his expression filled with such awe that it made Prudence's heart ache in the best way. "Have you thought about names?" Jonas asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand spread across her belly. "I have some ideas," Prudence said. "What about you?" "If it is a boy, I would like to name him after my grandfather, Samuel. He was a good man, taught me to read and write." Jonas paused. "And if it is a girl, maybe Grace, because Grace is what you have shown me." Prudence felt tears prick her eyes. "Those are beautiful names." The baby kicked, a solid thump against Jonas's palm. He grinned. "Strong already. Takes after the mother." "Or the father," Prudence countered. "We will have our hands full either way," Jonas said, pressing a kiss to her temple. In early September, as the aspen leaves began to turn gold and the air took on a crisp edge, Prudence's labor began. Jonas rode hard to town to fetch Martha Henderson, who had promised to serve as midwife. By the time they returned, Prudence's pains were coming regularly, stealing her breath. Martha took charge with calm efficiency, sending Jonas to boil water and gather clean linens. As the labor progressed through the afternoon and into the evening, Martha offered encouragement and support, while Jonas hovered anxiously, holding Prudence's hand whenever she needed him. "You are doing wonderfully," Martha assured her as another contraction gripped Prudence's body. "It will not be much longer now." Jonas looked pale but determined, his hand gripping Prudence's so tightly she thought her bones might break. "You can do this," he said. "You are the strongest person I know." Prudence wanted to tell him she did not feel strong, that she was exhausted and scared, and in more pain than she had ever imagined. But another contraction hit, and all she could do was bear down and push with everything she had. Finally, as the moon rose over the mountains, a baby's cry pierced the night. "A boy," Martha announced, wrapping the squalling infant in a clean blanket. "A beautiful, healthy boy." She placed the baby in Prudence's arms, and Prudence looked down at the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair, the miniature fingers that already gripped her thumb with surprising strength. Love, immediate and overwhelming, flooded through her. "Hello, Samuel," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Jonas was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and son. "He is perfect. Prudence, he is absolutely perfect." Martha cleaned up efficiently, checked on both mother and baby, and then tactfully excused herself to the main room to give them privacy. Jonas climbed carefully into the bed, gathering Prudence and Samuel into his arms. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for this gift. For everything." Prudence leaned against his chest, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "I love you, Jonas Blackwood." "I love you too, Prudence Blackwood, more than words can say." They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them together, while outside the mountain wind whispered through the pines and the stars wheeled overhead. The months that followed were both exhausting and joyful. Samuel was a good baby overall, but he still required constant attention. Prudence learned to function on little sleep, to nurse while half dozing, to change diapers with practiced efficiency. Jonas helped whenever he could, walking the floor with Samuel when he was fussy, rocking him to sleep so Prudence could rest. As winter settled over the mountains once more, they became a true family. Jonas would sit by the fire with Samuel sleeping on his broad chest, one large hand cupped protectively around the tiny body. Prudence would watch them together and feel her heart swell with love. Samuel grew quickly, his eyes darkening to match his father's, his grip growing stronger. By the time spring arrived again, he was sitting up on his own and babbling cheerfully. Jonas built him a cradle out of smooth pine, carving patterns into the headboard with patient skill. On their second wedding anniversary, Jonas surprised Prudence with a gift. He led her outside after breakfast. Samuel bundled in her arms and pointed to the side of the cabin. There, carved into a smooth panel of wood and mounted on the wall, were their names surrounded by an intricate border of flowers and vines: Jonas, Prudence, and Samuel Blackwood. Family. "So that everyone who comes here will know this is a house full of love," Jonas said softly. Prudence threw her free arm around his neck and kissed him soundly, much to Samuel's gurgling delight. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "Not perfect," Jonas said, "but trying my best. For you. For him. For us." That summer they expanded the homestead just as they had planned. Jonas built a larger chicken coop and bought more hens. They added 2 pigs to the livestock, and Jonas talked about getting sheep eventually. The garden flourished under Prudence's care, producing more vegetables than they could eat. She learned to preserve food for the winter, filling the storeroom with jars of pickles and preserves. Samuel took his first steps that autumn, toddling from Prudence's arms to Jonas's with a triumphant laugh. Jonas caught him and tossed him in the air, earning delighted squeals. Prudence watched them play together and thought about how far they had all come. She was no longer the frightened woman who had stepped off the train 2 years ago, certain she was unlovable. Jonas had taught her differently. He had shown her with patience and kindness that she was worthy of love, worthy of respect, worthy of happiness. He had given her a home, a family, a life filled with purpose and joy, and she had given him the same in return. She saw it in the way his face lit up when he came in from the fields and saw her waiting. She heard it in his laughter when they played with Samuel. She felt it in his embrace every night, in the way he held her like she was precious beyond measure. One evening in late autumn, after they had put Samuel to bed and sat together by the fire, Jonas reached for Prudence's hand. "I have been thinking," he said, "about how much our lives have changed, about how lucky I am." "I am the lucky one," Prudence countered. Jonas shook his head. "You took all the risk. You came here knowing nothing about me, trusting that I would treat you well. You could have arrived to find a monster. Instead, you found me, and you decided I was worth loving anyway." "There was no anyway about it," Prudence said firmly. "You were worth loving from the first day, Jonas. You just had to give me time to overcome my fear and see it." Jonas pulled her into his arms, and Prudence settled against his chest with a contented sigh. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, blanketing the mountain in white. Inside, the fire burned warm, and their son slept peacefully in his cradle. "Do you ever think about what your life might have been like if you had not answered my advertisement?" Jonas asked. Prudence considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I suppose I would still be in Philadelphia, still living with my aunt, still being made to feel worthless every day. Or perhaps I would have found some other means of escape. But I cannot imagine it would have led me anywhere better than here." "I think about it too," Jonas said, "about what my life would be like without you and Samuel, and I cannot stand the thought. You two are everything to me." "And you are everything to us," Prudence said. She tilted her head back to look at him. "I love you, Jonas. I love the life we have built together. I love being your wife." Jonas kissed her deeply, thoroughly, with all the passion and tenderness of a man who had found his other half. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too, Prudence, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." They stayed by the fire until it burned low, content in each other's presence, and then went to bed together. They made love slowly, quietly, mindful of their sleeping son in the next room. Afterward, Jonas held Prudence close, his hand resting on her stomach. "I hope we have more children," he said softly. "I hope we fill this cabin with laughter and life." "I hope so too," Prudence murmured, already drowsy. "But even if it is just the 3 of us, that would be enough, more than enough." "You are right," Jonas agreed. "As long as I have you, I have everything I need." Years passed, and the Blackwood family grew. Prudence gave birth to a daughter 2 years after Samuel, a golden-haired girl they named Grace, just as Jonas had suggested. Then came another boy, William, strong and sturdy like his father. Finally, a third child, a daughter named Rose, completed their family. The cabin expanded to accommodate them all. Jonas built additional rooms with the same care he put into everything he did. The homestead prospered, becoming one of the most productive in the area. Jonas's reputation as an honest, hard-working man spread, and he was often called upon to help neighbors with difficult tasks. Prudence became known in Silver Ridge as well, not for her size or appearance, but for her kindness and capability. She helped deliver babies when Martha grew too old for the work, tended the sick, and always had a warm meal for anyone who needed one. The women who had once mocked her became silent, or, in some cases, apologetic. Prudence forgave them, understanding that hurt people often hurt others, and moved on. Samuel grew into a tall, strong young man, as quick with his mind as he was with his hands. Grace was her mother's daughter, capable and kind, with a gift for growing things. William was adventurous, always exploring the mountains, and Rose was the baby of the family, charming everyone she met with her bright smile. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Jonas and Prudence stood together on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel was showing William how to split wood properly, while Grace and Rose picked wildflowers near the edge of the clearing. "Do you remember the day we married?" Jonas asked, his arm around Prudence's shoulders. "I remember being terrified," Prudence admitted. "I thought I was making the worst mistake of my life." "And now?" Jonas prompted. Prudence looked up at him, seeing the gray threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. He was still strong, still capable, but age was leaving its mark. On her, too, she knew. But it did not matter. They had grown old together, had built a life together, had created a family together. "Now I know it was the best decision I ever made," Prudence said. "You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. Love, family, a home. You taught me that I was worthy of all those things." "You were always worthy," Jonas said gently. "I just helped you see it. And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that," Prudence said. Jonas kissed the top of her head. "No gratitude necessary. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." They stood together, watching the sun set over the mountains they had made their home, surrounded by the evidence of their love and the laughter of their children, the sturdy cabin Jonas had built, the garden Prudence tended. They had started as strangers brought together by an advertisement, one scared and one lonely. But they had become partners in the truest sense, building a life of love and joy in the wilderness. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, Jonas and Prudence called their children inside. They gathered around the table for supper, all talking at once, sharing stories about their day. Jonas sat at the head of the table with Prudence beside him, their hands clasped together, and looked at the family they had created. Later, after the children were in bed, Jonas and Prudence retired to their own room. They undressed slowly, comfortable with each other after so many years together. When they climbed into bed, the same bed where their marriage had truly begun all those years ago, Jonas pulled Prudence into his arms. "Do you remember the first night I slept in this bed with you?" he asked. "I remember," Prudence said. "I was so nervous, but you just held me. You were so patient." "I would have waited forever if that was what you needed," Jonas said. "I know," Prudence replied. "That is why I was able to trust you. You never demanded anything I was not ready to give." Jonas kissed her softly. "I love you, Prudence, just as much now as I did on our wedding day. More even, because now I know all the wonderful things about you that I could only guess at then." "I love you too, Jonas. Thank you for being the man I needed, the man I still need." They fell asleep in each other's arms, just as they had done for 15 years. And if you had asked either of them whether they had any regrets about answering that advertisement so long ago, they would have told you no. Every fear overcome, every challenge faced, every moment of joy and sorrow had led them here, to a life rich with love and purpose. The years continued to pass, bringing with them all the joys and sorrows that make up a life. Jonas's hair turned fully gray, and Prudence's figure softened further with age. But their love remained constant, a steady flame that warmed them through every season. Samuel married a schoolteacher from Silver Ridge and built his own cabin nearby. Grace wed a young rancher and moved to a valley 20 miles away, close enough to visit often. William became a guide, leading people through the mountains he knew so well. And Rose, the baby, grew into a lovely young woman who worked alongside her mother, learning all the skills Prudence had to teach. Jonas and Prudence became grandparents, delighting in the children their own children brought into the world. Their cabin, which had once seemed so quiet and empty, was frequently filled with the sounds of family, with laughter and conversation, and the patter of small feet. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. The cabin could barely hold everyone, but no one minded the crowding. Jonas and Prudence sat together in the rocking chairs by the fire, watching the chaos with happy smiles. "Look what we made," Jonas said softly, gesturing to their family. "All of this came from one advertisement in a newspaper." "All of this came from you being kind to a frightened woman who expected nothing but cruelty," Prudence corrected. "You could have been harsh or demanding. Instead, you were patient and gentle." "And you could have remained afraid forever," Jonas pointed out. "But you chose courage. You chose to trust me, to love me, to build this life with me." Samuel called for everyone's attention, and the room gradually quieted. "My sister and brothers and I wanted to say a few words about our parents," he began. "We grew up watching them love each other, watching them work together, watching them face every challenge as a team. They taught us what marriage should be, what family should be, and we are all grateful for that example." Grace stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Mother, you taught me that strength comes in many forms, that kindness is not weakness, and that love is the most powerful force in the world." "Father," William added, "you showed me that real strength is not about how much you can lift or how hard you can fight. It is about protecting those you love, about being gentle with those who need gentleness, about building instead of destroying." Rose, the youngest, spoke last. "You two created a home filled with love, not just for us, but for everyone who walked through your door. You made this mountain a better place by being in it, and we love you both more than words can say." Prudence was crying openly now, and Jonas's eyes were suspiciously bright. Their children and grandchildren crowded around them, hugging them, expressing their love in a dozen different ways. Later, after everyone had left and the cabin was quiet once more, Jonas and Prudence sat on the porch, watching the stars. "We did all right, didn't we?" Jonas said, his voice gruff with emotion. "We did better than all right," Prudence replied. "We did magnificently." Jonas took her hand, the gesture as familiar and comforting as breathing. "I was thinking about that heavy bride who stepped off the train in Silver Ridge all those years ago," he said with a smile. "The one who was so afraid." "I was not afraid of you specifically," Prudence protested. "I was afraid of what I thought you would expect, of what I thought marriage meant." "And now?" Jonas asked. "Now I know that marriage means partnership. It means loving someone through good times and bad, through youth and age, through every season of life. It means choosing each other every single day." Prudence squeezed his hand. "And I would choose you again in a heartbeat." "As would I," Jonas said. He stood, pulling her to her feet. "Come on, let's go to bed. I'm not getting any younger, and sitting in these rocking chairs makes my back ache." Prudence laughed and let him lead her inside. They prepared for bed with the practiced ease of 25 years of marriage, and when they climbed under the quilt, Jonas pulled her close. "Do you know what I am most proud of?" he asked into the darkness. "What?" "That I kept my word to you. That first night, I promised you would have kindness. I promised I would provide for you and protect you. I promised I would never hurt you, and I kept every one of those promises." "You did," Prudence agreed, "and you gave me so much more besides. You gave me love, Jonas, real, true, lasting love, the kind I never thought I would have." "You deserved it all along," Jonas said. "I'm just glad I was the one who got to give it to you." They fell asleep as they had for 25 years, wrapped in each other's arms, content in the life they had built and the love they shared. More years passed, and Jonas and Prudence grew old together on their mountain. Their children's children had children, extending the family they had started. The cabin that Jonas had built with his own hands stood strong, a testament to his skill and care. The garden Prudence had tended for decades continued to flourish under Rose's care. Jonas's strength began to fade as he entered his 70s, but his love for Prudence never wavered. On the days when his joints ached too much to work, Prudence would sit with him, reading aloud from the books they both loved. When Prudence's eyesight began to fail, Jonas would describe the mountain views to her in such detail that she could see them in her mind's eye. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by so much family that the gathering had to be held outside. Jonas stood, his hair white as snow, but his eyes still bright with love, and addressed the crowd. 50 years ago, I placed an advertisement looking for a wife. I thought I knew what I wanted, what I needed. But I had no idea how much richer my life would become when Prudence answered that advertisement. He turned to her, taking her hands in his. You have been my partner, my best friend, my greatest love. You have given me a family, a home, a reason to wake up every morning, and I thank God for every day I have had with you. Prudence stood with Jonas's help, her own hair silver, her body softened and rounded with age. I was so afraid when I came here, she said, her voice still strong despite her years. I thought I was unlovable, unworthy of kindness. Jonas taught me differently. He showed me with patient action every day that I was worthy of love. He gave me the courage to trust, to open my heart, to build a life. And the life we built together has been more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible. They kissed, to the cheers and applause of their family. And if the kiss was softer and gentler than it had been in their youth, it was no less filled with love. That night, lying in bed together, Jonas stroked Prudence's hair. I want you to know something, he said quietly. What is that? If I were given the chance to live my life over again, to make different choices, I wouldn't change a single thing. Every step, every decision led me to you, and you have made my life complete. Mine too, Prudence whispered. Every fear I faced, every tear I shed, it was all worth it to end up here with you. They fell asleep holding hands, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Jonas passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Prudence beside him. His last words were to tell her that he loved her, that he had always loved her, that he would love her beyond death itself. Prudence grieved deeply for the loss of her partner, but she took comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together. She remained on the mountain, in the cabin Jonas had built, surrounded by memories of their love. She lived for another 7 years, seeing more great-grandchildren born, sharing stories about Jonas with anyone who would listen. She spoke of his kindness, his patience, his gentle strength. She made sure everyone knew how he had saved her, not just from her circumstances, but from a life without love. When Prudence passed away at the age of 82, her family laid her to rest beside Jonas on a hillside overlooking the valley. They placed a simple stone marker that read, Jonas and Prudence Blackwood, married August 15, 1876, forever together. But their true legacy was not the stone or even the cabin that still stood strong. It was the family they had created, the love they had shared, the example they had set. Their children told their children, who told their children, about the heavy bride who was afraid and the mountain man who was patient, gentle, and kind. About how love, real love, sees past fear and finds the beautiful soul beneath. About how two broken people can heal each other and build something magnificent. The cabin on the mountain remained in the family for generations, a reminder of where it all began. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the pines and the stars wheeled overhead, those who lived there could almost feel the presence of Jonas and Prudence, their love still lingering in the walls they had filled with laughter, in the garden they had tended together, in every corner of the home they had built. Their story became part of the mountain itself, a testament to the transformative power of patient love, to the courage it takes to trust, and to the beautiful life that can grow when two people choose each other every single day for a lifetime and beyond.